First time I had any association with Srila Prabhupada directly was in the Paris temple when it was in the south end of town in a suburb called Fontenay-aux-Roses. All the devotees had left for the airport to greet Srila Prabhupada and bring him back. And myself and one or two other devotees stayed back because I was the temple commander and I had to make sure everything was properly cleaned. And I was scrubbing the toilet really fast. We had one toilet and I was scrubbing it really hard when I could hear all of a sudden chanting outside, and I knew Prabhupada was there, real ecstatic chanting. I was in a tiny little room, which must have been like 3 feet by 5 feet or something. And I could feel Prabhupada's presence because the stairs coming into the side entrance to the temple, which was an old house, had been converted to a temple. And I could feel Prabhupada. He knew I was in. I could tell he knew I was in there, and I was scrubbing. I could tell he was happy that I was doing some kind of service. He almost knocked me over with his energy, and I was astounded. And I was scared for a moment. I never felt anything like that. Then I realized this is transcendental life. And then he passed. And then the second time, of course, was when he gave class, and he came in the temple room. Later, after I'd taken a shower and changed my clothes, he came in the temple room to give a lecture, and he looked like Srila Prabhupada. He said he had tons of garlands on, fresh flowers, beautiful flowers. But he was glowing. He had Krishna's complexion. I couldn't believe it, and the colors were like Technicolor. I was floored. He looked at me with a big smile on his face, and he sat down, gave a very nice lecture. And then the third time at Prabhupada is he had gone for a morning walk. It was the next day, his second day in Paris, and it had been raining. So as soon as it stopped raining, Prabhupada went on a morning walk, and I came outside, I noticed that the rainwater had plugged up the drain where Prabhupada was going to walk. It was a puddle that must have been 6 to 8 inches deep. I said, Prabhupada can't walk through there. And I could hear his car just arrive, and the devotees were coming up the walkway around the corner. So I got down on my hands and knees and took the lid off the drain, reached down there about all the way up to my elbow and grabbed a bunch of muck, pulled it out. And just when I pulled it out, I saw Prabhupada's feet come around the corner as I was down on my hands and knees, and I thought, oh, this water's not going to go down. But all of a sudden, it just went down, and just like that. All the water went down immediately. Prabhupada walked past me, and I had my head down, just giving my obeisances, and I had a handful of muck in my right hand. Those were the days, being temple commander, and all these devotees had come from England and Germany, and the French devotees, of course. And that was the first year that I met Srila Prabhupada. The second was Prabhupada's stay in Paris at Fontenay-aux-Roses Temple in 1972 was in the month of August, if I recall correctly. And I had gotten first initiation earlier in the year. Prabhupada had given me the name Gauracandra Das. And I remember seeing the letter. It was Gauracandra space Das. And I and another devotee, Prabhava Vigraha Das, had tried to open a little temple in Marseille. We'd done a lot of traveling Sankirtan from there, a little bit. And the devotees from Paris had come down, and Bhagavan had just come over from the United States to be GBC. And they thought since Prabhupada was there, it'd be a good time for me to get second initiation. So I was told to go at Prabhupada's room, which was on the second floor. It was a little room, beautifully decorated. They decorated very nicely with great wallpaper. And I went and gave my obeisances. And Prabhupada taught me how to count on my fingers and repeat after him. They'd give me a little piece of paper, and it was a little bit different than the way he's pronouncing it, but I decided to pronounce it just the way he said it. And then he threw the Brahmin thread on me. Now, as temple commander, I didn't go on any morning walks until one day Bhagavan said, Gauracandra, Prabhu, you get to go on a morning walk today. I was ecstatic. So we got into the temple van, which was a relatively new Volkswagen van that some devotee just was a college student in the United States, in New York, had joined in Paris, and he decided to take his savings, buy the devotees a van. And I sat behind Srila Prabhupada, sat in the front passenger seat. We got to the park in Paris, and we got out, and as we were taking the morning walk, I thought, I better stand just a little bit in front of Prabhupada to protect him in case of, anybody with bad vibes or, or wants to attack, like I had a protective attitude. Prabhupada all of a sudden nudged me with his shoulder and indicated I should walk a little behind him. He's the guru, he'll protect me. When I realized that, I started walking a little bit back. He looked at me and he smiled. And then he started speaking. He said, I'm actually in my photograph, he said. When you see me in my photo, I'm actually there. He says, another thing, though, is when you dream of me, I am actually there. And I said, Jai Prabhupada. And he said, and then he emphasized, he stopped for a moment and he looked at me again, continued to walk, and he said, no, when you dream of me, I am actually there. And I said, Jai Prabhupada, with a little more emphasis as well. And he was happy. And as we walked a little bit, he said to me, he looked at the corner of his eye and he looked at me and he said, do you know what is sex? And I thought, oh my God, here I'm a brahmachari, and Prabhupada's asking me if I know what sex is. And I said, well, obviously he wants to tell me from the Vedic point of view what it is. And I said, I'm going to say no. And I said, no, Prabhupada. And he smiled really big. And because he could tell what I was thinking, that I was, that he wanted to explain, and I was trying to be receptive. And he said, sex is when a man and a woman exchange energy, not just on the physical level, but on the subtle level. It's not just physical, but it's on the subtle level. This exchange of subtle energy between the man and a woman attracts a third party who has a subtle body but needs a material body. Prabhupada looked at me and he said, there are many Brahmins and devotees and demigods who want to take birth in this movement. And then I was like, oh my God, I was Prabhupada, am I hearing what I think I'm hearing? Does Prabhupada want me to, have sex, have children? And my face turned, I could feel it turning beet red. It was so hot, I thought it was on fire. Prabhupada looked at me with a smile like I've never seen before. His eyes, they looked greenish. He looked at this smile and he was content and he kept walking. I was trying to hide behind him because I could feel my face turning beet red. I'm sure all the devotees walking behind us were looking at me. And as we were walking along, Prabhupada said, let's go over here. But at that time, I looked at my watch and I said, Prabhupada, we have a lot of service to do back at the temple. And I said, I'm temple commander. I think we should go now. Prabhupada stopped and he looked at me and all the devotees. And he said, oh, this is the temple commander. We must do what he tells us. So we walked back to the van. Of course, later I realized we could have spent another half hour, an hour there getting the nectar. I didn't realize my faux pas. Prabhupada he was just so merciful. He was just such a gentleman, kind-hearted. I realize now he might have been a little sarcastic. But I kick myself every time I think of that pastime of Prabhupada. I could have just kept my mouth shut, But I was thinking, I had to do my service, and this and that. My service was to serve Srila Prabhupada, but directly. I was right there. Can't believe it. Anyway, what are you going to do? The next time I had Prabhupada's, the Mercy of Prabhupada's Association was in the summer of 1973. And by that time, I was in the Amsterdam Yatra, and we had a traveling Sankirtan party, an old Ford van, Taunus van, and a crew of about 4 or 5 other brahmacharis. We got in the van, drove down to Paris. That was for the installation of Radha Paraseshwara. And as soon as I got there, it was just like, although the temple was in a new location, we'd moved from that house in Fontenay-aux-Roses to a large building in a very, very nice area of Paris, the 14th arrondissement on Rue Le Seur. And Prabhupada had much bigger quarters. Everything was very, very nice. Bigger temple. Everything was just on a more grandiose level. There were more devotees and everything was just Krishna's mercy. Anyway, the devotees were working so hard. They immediately started me cooking for the devotees and the deities, and I was there for the installation. And then after about a day or two, I was told, take your Sankirtan team. There's 2 other Sankirtan teams in Prabhupada's room already. Gather your Sankirtan team from Amsterdam and go sit in Prabhupada's room. So we got together. We said, God, we get to go in Prabhupada's room. We sat in the back, and I looked to my right. There was perhaps a German or English Sankirtan team, brahmacharis, 4 or 5 of them, and to our left, the other side of my teammates were other devotees, perhaps from Germany or England. And Prabhupada was having a conversation with a Spanish Catholic priest. I was told Prabhupada right now is speaking with a Spanish Catholic priest and 2 French nuns. Now, Prabhupada was at his desk. Yogeshwara was just to his left to translate from French into English, English into French. And the 2 nuns, although they were dressed in dark clothing, they weren't dressed in habits. But they were there sitting with the Spanish Catholic priest. I don't think they came together. I think it might have been a randomly just met and came to see Prabhupada at the same time. And James Vincent Ferrantino, Shruta Kirti was to our left. And he was folding Prabhupada's clothes. And as he did it slowly so he can listen to the conversation. He's always drinking in the nectar. Everybody envied his great service, you know. And everybody's happy for him, too. Such a nice devotee. Anyway, as Prabhupada was speaking, we were listening to the conversation. Prabhupada was speaking this point of philosophy and religion. They brought in a maha tray. One of the devotees brought in this big silver maha tray platter and put it down on Prabhupada's desk. It was filled with the latest offering. It must have been the 4 o'clock offering. There was fruit and sweet balls and different things like that. And Prabhupada said to the guests, will you have some, please? This is called maha. It just came from the altar. Have some. And they acted they acted like they were renounced. Oh, no, we're great. And so Prabhupada kind of looked at us like, he wanted some maha, but you don't eat in front of your guests. Anyway, they asked Prabhupada a question. Prabhupada answered. And then as they were looking at Yogeshwara, they were intent on looking at Yogeshwara speaking in French and explaining Prabhupada's answer. Prabhupada surreptitiously passed his hand over the maha, grabbed a sweet ball, and then acted like he was going to scratch his nose, but he put the sweet ball in his mouth. And he was sitting there with a sweet ball in his mouth. And as they were looking at Yogeshwara, he was slowly chewing. And then all of a sudden, Yogeshwara turned towards Prabhupada and said, Prabhupada, when you said such and such, did you mean this? And Prabhupada went, he looked. I think he did it for the benefit of the brahmacharis in the back. Because he did like a double take, like caught kind of a thing. But he didn't say anything. Well, he stopped chewing and he went, when Yogeshwara, do you mean this? And Prabhupada went, mm-hmm. Went like that. And of course, we were in the back room, we started laughing. And immediately, the 2 nuns and the priest thought we were laughing at them. And maybe we thought their question was dumb or something. So they turned around and looked at us. And when they turned around and looked at us, Prabhupada, he knew the back of their heads were facing him. He started chewing like really fast and swallowing. And then, but the thing is that the priest, he recognized me because I come from an old family. And he looked at me and he smiled really big. And I come from an old Jewish family, actually. I grew up in Estoril, which is an enclave of royalty. I happened to be born in the Israeli royal family of Israel and Judea. But I wasn't raised knowing this. My parents they just had other things to think and talk about, although genealogists talk about my school teachers, my friends. But anyway, the priest recognized me, and Catholics, Christians, and Jews, and even Muslims know who I am because I'm a direct descendant of Jesus' younger brother, St. James, who's the first bishop of the Christian church in Jerusalem. At the first, in the diaspora of the Jewish people when Rome attacked and sacked the temple of Jerusalem, they traveled to Iberia and settled in Portugal, where my grandfather from 14 generations ago, Joaquim, was asked to convert to Christianity. He had a dream where Krishna, God appeared to him in the dream and said, "You're going to convert, and because religion is your family business, and I'm one God, and I'm the same in all religions." And they're going to ask you 3 questions. Like, the most important one was, who is the Pope? The one in Tuscany, the one in Rome, or the one in France? And you're going to tell them it's the one in Rome. And so when the knights of the king of Portugal came to visit him, when they said, "Will you convert?" he said yes, and they all take a real sigh of relief. It's great, because we don't want to touch the nephew of the Lord Jesus. So we have a very important question to ask. He said the Pope is actually the one in Rome, and his first name, long story short, became the family last name, which is why my last name, Carmi last name, is Joaquim. At any rate, so the priest, when he saw me, he nodded to the nuns, and he nodded back at me, and they turned around to wonder, what is he saying? They looked at me, and they also smiled, did a double take and smiled. So then the priest, I could tell he was thinking something. I could see the cogs turning. As he turned towards Prabhupada and said, "Do you know who is George Manuel Joaquim?" And the nuns were also interested in seeing if Prabhupada knew. And Yogeshwar acted like, where did this question come from? Just out of the blue. He said, "Prabhupada, they want to know if you know who is George Manuel Joaquim." And Prabhupada, "George Manuel Joaquim? Of course I do." He was real happy. He said, "Yeah." They looked at me, looked back at them. They all went, they all started chuckling and laughing, turned around and looking at me. And now my brahmachari team, 4 or 5 of them sitting next to me. The one sitting next to me was Ramgati Das. He nudged me. He said, "Prabhupada knows," because everywhere we went, in Germany, France, Belgium, we were on the street. They would be approached by strangers in the street and they'd point at me and say, "Is that George Manuel Joaquim?" So I was famous for being the nephew of the Lord Jesus. But a lot of people also said, because numerically, every 14 generations is predicted in the biblical scripture, that person is considered to be the Christ. And as it turned out, they also said this. It said, "Gauracandra, even Hari Vilas, when I first read the show, are you telling people you're the Christ?" I said, "No, I never thought about it, Anyway, I said, "No." They said, "Well, the newspapers." I said, "Well, that's where they got it from, the newspapers. They don't print anything, just sell papers, the magazines." Anyway, Prabhupada said, "You call him George Manuel Joaquim." And the priests and the nuns went, yes, that's right. We. They went like that. And Prabhupada said, "We call him Gauracandra Das. George Manuel Joaquim to us is Gauracandra Das." And they were kind of a little mystified. Prabhupada said, "Gauracandra is another name for God. Lord Chaitanya appeared 500 years ago in India. He's an incarnation of God to spread the love of God. And his name, and Das means servant. So his name means servant of the Lord." And they went, "Oh, very nice." They turned around and looked at me, and Prabhupada looked at me, and a big smile on their faces. Prabhupada said, You Christians call him the Christ, correct?" And they went, Yes, that's right. And I was like, my Sankirtan team were gasping. At this point, Yogeshwar is looking at me and looking back at Prabhupada, and so is Srutakirti. He stopped folding clothes, and he's looking back. First, they're mystified. All the devotees are mystified. How does Prabhupada know my Karmi name? You'd never see me associate coming in and out of his room. He'd never spoken about it before to anyone. But at any rate, Prabhupada said, "And the Jews call him the Messiah. Is that not correct?" And they said, "Yes, that's right." And they said, "We Vaishnavas, you call Hare Krishnas. We Vaishnavas, we call him a pure devotee. He, to us, is a pure devotee." And I'm sitting there, I am like, I can't believe he's talking about me. In fact, it took a long time for it to sink in. And my crew were like, whoa, because in Amsterdam, people would come to the temple and say, "We want to see they'd ask about me." Anyway, at this point, Yogeshwar says to Prabhupada, "Oh, you mean he's a pure devotee, just like the rest of us devotees are pure devotees, right, Prabhupada?" Prabhupada made a face like, "What?" And he said, No, Gauracandra Das is a pure devotee." He waved his hand. He said, "The rest of you are not." And at this point, you could hear a pin drop. And then they started laughing. At that point, it was time for us to leave. And I wanted to leave. To be the subject of that conversation for me was excruciating, So the devotees ran out of the room and told the other devotees in the temple. And the tape was rolling. I want to find that tape. I looked for it on the internet. I couldn't find it. I have to get in contact with the tape ministry and try to get a copy or a transition. But as soon as we left, the devotees went up to Bhagavan, who had been hearing this and seeing it in the papers and the magazines. And he said, Prabhupada said, Gauracandra is a pure devotee. He's the Christ. He's the Messiah. And Bhagavan said, don't tell anybody. At any rate, after that,
Hold on. Is that the story that you confirmed?
Yes, that's the story. Yeah, because it sounds so, In fact, in my email to Shruti Kirti, I said, I hope you remember this, otherwise I'm going to sound like a complete crazy person. But he confirmed. So I was either I could contact him or Yogeshwar or both.
Hold on. So I want the audience then to know.
Acha.
So there's an edit, so I'm going a little closer up.
Right.
So, follow that up by saying, somebody may not believe this, but I actually emailed Shruti Kirti to confirm.
Oh, okay.
What Prabhupada actually said.
All right.
I'm not just glorifying myself, but this is actually happening.
Jai.
So give the verification.
Jai. The reason I tell this story because it is a Prabhupada pastime. And of course, I might be a little proud Prabhupada spoke about me, though at the time it just didn't sink in. But before coming to be interviewed, I emailed the very nice devotee, Shruti Kirti Das, who was there in the room, asking him for confirmation of the story and to add to it, or was I exaggerating anything? And he said, no, that's the way he remembers it. He may not remember it in the greatest detail, but he said that I should just tell the story the same way I told him, which is what I've done. I've repeated it, hearing and repeating. So Shruti Kirti was there. He confirms. The next time, later that year, we were asked to go to London. So the devotees got in the van from Amsterdam. We went to London. Sure, was the Prabhupada's first visit to Bhaktivedanta Manor. And not only that, it was Rath Yatra, the 1973 London Rath Yatra. So we got in the van, and we got on the ferry boat from Ostend, Belgium, to Dover. And I was very excited to go to Britain for the first time. I'd been in Europe. I went to a little private American school in Europe. I'd moved to Europe in 63 when I was 11. By this time, 73, I was a lot older. I was 21. And I was excited to see the White Cliffs of Dover. Now, everything in England was smaller than I thought it would be. And I remember then it was a pastime Prabhupada. When he got to London, he said, everything is so small. When you hear about it overseas, you think everything is going to be so big. The thing is, they have to import all the raw materials into that country. It's a small island. But anyway, we got there, and we had to go through customs. Now, British customs are very tough. And they're famous for really going into your personality, your past, your paperwork. They've discovered many famous criminals trying to hide and come into Britain or, change their names. So when we got there, the customs guy looked at us and could already tell he didn't like our looks because we had shaved heads and dhotis. He maybe didn't like devotees, or maybe it was a religious thing, who knows. But he was a little hard on us. And Tulsi Das, the temple president, he was explained to them. He had all our passports in his hands, and they asked him how much money he had. He gave the amount as a group bank account from the temple, and Lakshmi was no problem, so they couldn't say no because of that. But he explained, why do you want to come to Britain? He says, we have a festival, and our guru is here. We have a new center, the Bhaktivedanta Manor. And I noticed I'd heard about this, that I saw a few surveillance cameras in different stores in Amsterdam. I hadn't really noticed these things before, but when we got to Britain, I noticed surveillance cameras everywhere. So I started looking at the surveillance camera, and I could feel that somehow someone was looking at me. And as I looked back, I decided, I could feel some energy there. And then also I looked away. All of a sudden, it happened to be the guy on the other side of the surveillance, was the manager. He looked just like the first customs guy, with a mustache and a blazer and a tie, but taller. And he came in and said, he looked at me, And I could tell he was the guy who started the camera. He says, is there a George Manuel Joaquim here? And the guy said, yeah. He said, here's his passport. And the first customs guy's all excited. He says, what did he do? What is he? Is he on the run? Is he a criminal? I said, no, nothing of the sort. He said, now, what are they coming to Britain for? He says, they're coming for a festival in London in 2-3 days. And he said, how long do they want to stay? And he said, they want to stay 3 days, that's it. He says, okay. He said, who's this George Manuel Joaquim? He says, he's Jesus' nephew. And he said, Jesus' nephew? And the guy looked really, he looked like he didn't believe a word of it. He was a little incredulous. And he said, where do you know this from? He says, don't you read the papers? It's on television, it's in The Guardian. And he says, in The Guardian? Do you believe anything you read in The Guardian? And the guy said, it's also in the London Times. Not only that, I'm your boss. You do what I tell you to do, and you're going to stamp, give them 3 months. Just 3 months, they only want to stay 3 days. Says, well, it's maybe George Manuel Joaquim will stay longer. It says it's in Her Majesty's government interest for him to stay here in England. And so the guy was sheepishly started stamping everybody's passports for us to stay. That was amazing. It was an amazing pastime. But anyway.
That's your pastime. That's a good one.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm leading up to meeting Prabhupada on Rath Yatra. I'm sorry.
Correct after Prabhupada.
Yeah. At any rate, during Rath Yatra, I was in charge of distributing prasadam. We had gates, barricades. We had tables with tons of prasadam to give to we had many, many Indian guests coming and other people coming to Rath Yatra. When I could see in the distance the carts coming up down the street, hear the chanting, I got so excited I jumped over the barricade and I ran into the crowd when I saw I couldn't make it into the crowd. And everybody was chanting in a circle. I could tell Prabhupada was in the middle. What I did is I got on my hands and knees and I crawled between everybody's legs. All of a sudden I saw myself, I was in a clearing in this crowd, and there was Prabhupada's feet right in front of me, and he was dancing, ecstatic with his arms upraised. I got up and I started dancing with Prabhupada. Prabhupada started dancing with me, and he was looking at me in such a way I could tell that he was in a very serious mood, that we must spread this Krishna consciousness, this chanting to the holy name, this Rath Yatra, and everything to do with ISKCON and Krishna consciousness, his books. And I danced ecstatically. I thought, they're going to grab me and throw me out of here. I better dance, take advantage of this moment. When I looked around and I saw the other devotees, all the devotees were looking at me ecstatically too. They were so happy for me that I was dancing with Prabhupada. So then I decided I better go back to my service and give my obeisances, and I crawled back out through the devotees. And there was a film of this. Yaddo Bar shot a film. I can't find it again. I saw it a couple of times a few years ago. But I'd love to get a copy of that film, that video, Dancing with Prabhupada. That was ecstatic. The next time I saw Srila Prabhupada was in the Brooklyn Temple on Henry Street in 1973. I was doing service there. I was a receptionist for a while. I could get along with people, answer the phone, and greet people at the door. But and then the next time I saw Srila Prabhupada was in New Vrindavan, 1974. I was in New Vrindavan during the summer months, when the September came and snowflakes the size of quarters started falling out of the sky. I suddenly remembered I was a California boy. And from there I made my way to Washington, D.C., and back to California, eventually 75, and I was living in Laguna. And Prabhupada came to Laguna Beach in 1975. And I was in not the temple we have today, but a few doors down was a much smaller temple, a house. We converted a temple, and Prabhupada was giving a lecture. And I remember him talking about Garuda and saying how Garuda and the big birds of the celestial world, they eat elephants as snacks. I remember Prabhupada looking at me and smiling really big. I was thinking, wow, that's a great story. But the next time I saw Prabhupada, also at that time, he was in Los Angeles. We traveled from Los Angeles to L.A. Now, I'd had a very bad habit of smoking cigarettes when I was a teenager before coming to Krishna consciousness. But by reading my first BTG I remember the first time I saw Back to Godhead magazine was on January 1st, 1971. So I remember that day because I was walking along the beach, got hit by a wave, and my friend's house was just a few hundred yards away. I went there to dry off, and I saw a BTG in his living room. They had gotten, this was in Portugal, he got it in Boston. Anyway, the four regs, from just reading about Krishna consciousness, what to speak of ever knowing devotee, I stopped smoking, joined the movement, but for one reason or another, I started smoking again, and we were in the temple with Prabhupada, and I was very nervous about having this smoking habit. I remember Prabhupada looking at me in the Los Angeles temple, a lot of devotees. Prabhupada said, all of a sudden, Prabhupada looked at me and he said, what does it say on the side of a cigarette package? And so I was ready to collapse. And some young brahmachari started waving, Prabhupada, it says, the Surgeon General says that it's bad for you. Says Prabhupada said, yes, precisely. It is poison. And then Prabhupada looked again at me and he said, but what is poison for one man is medicine for another. Just don't smoke too much. Now, I unfortunately tried to heed that advice. I was not able to follow it, but I'm very happy to say, by Krishna's mercy, and only by Krishna's mercy, was I able to stop smoking and other bad habits. Otherwise, I'm sure I wouldn't be here today. So I thank you, Prabhupada. Saved my life in so many ways, on so many levels. One quality of Srila Prabhupada that stands out in my mind is his self-confidence. He knew what the absolute truth was and wasn't afraid to speak it. Whether it rubbed people the wrong way because of their misconceptions or poor understanding or biases. Prabhupada spoke the truth, and that was his only business, and that's what he did. Fearlessness. What Prabhupada used to say, Vaishnav means fearless. Srila Prabhupada was certainly that. Because he was self-confidence, he was fearless. But whether one's lacking a little bit in confidence, they say that a brave person, a hero, he feels fear just like anybody else, but he knows what his duty is, and he performs it anyway. And that was what I loved about Srila Prabhupada. That's what attracted me, his fearlessness, self-confidence, and his dedication to serving his guru. He was a best example ever to anyone how to be a devotee.